Hello and welcome to episode 241 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, a universal plug-in charge protocol for EV charging is coming in 2025. This is great news for non-Tesla charging. You just plug in and walk away, just like a trailer park dad.
A new program at a Boston hospital sees patients receiving a prescription for solar power. Now, if they could add a prescription to listening to this podcast, we'd really have something.
Absolutely. The Earth is not as bright as it used to be, and that is causing problems. I'll let you write your own joke about how this applies to me, too. And boy, is it true.
Yes. And our favorite special guest is back on the podcast after a very long time away. Here he is with a special electric vehicle announcement.
This is Pope Francis, the cool Pope, back on the Clean Energy Show to announce my sweet new ride, an all-electric Mercedes G-Wagon. This is the new Popomobile. It also comes with an ejector seat, flamethrowers, and the Clean Energy Show permanently on the sound system.
Nice. All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And welcome, Popes and everyone else. And, technically we have to now, we'll get kicked off podcast platforms if we don't specify that we used a AI voice. That actually was not the Pope.
What?
It's not saying that he doesn't listen to our show. I'm sure he has plenty of time for listening to our show.
It's just he was too busy this time to appear, so we said, hey, well, you write a script, Pope, and, we'll get the AI to do the rest.
Something like that.
I'm getting used to not having mail delivery. We've had a postal strike here in Canada for a couple of weeks, and I really love getting the mail. Like, I always get excited when the letter carrier is walking up to the door, and I think, ooh, great, it's mail
You're just
time.
like a
Time
dog.
To get the mail.
You're no different than some dog. Why?
Totally.
Who gets excited about mail these days?
Well, here's the thing. I realized that I shouldn't have been getting excited for mail because after 1 or 2 days of the strike, I got used to it. It's like, oh, right, we're not getting mail anymore. And now it's like, I don't even remember getting mail. Like, what was I excited about? That was so dumb. No one gets real mail anymore. The whole thing is a waste of time.
Well, it snowed a bit last night, and I thought, we don't have mail delivery. I keep saying that. But then I got an Amazon package. And the guy sort of got pissed off and just threw it at my front step from afar. I have it on tape if you'd like to look. I mean, it's right there. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You got to keep your sidewalk clear for, packages or whatever. Just very quickly, you were talking recently about all the wind power that they have in South Dakota, which was a little bit of a surprise, but there was a great story here from Energy News Network that data centers are looking to locate possibly in South Dakota. And I just wanted to mention it because you had said they have basically excess clean power at this moment. But what I thought was interesting about it is there's the advantage of all the wind power, but also the temperature, like the cooling. Like data centers are notorious for needing lots of cooling. Well, guess what? If you set up in a cold place, like South Dakota, which is not too far from where we are, you get free cooling in the winter. You just open a window and it will cool your data centers.
That's what I thought. And I thought we'd be an excellent place for a data center because it doesn't get crazy hot in the summer, at least. And when it does, it cools down at night most of the times. So, but then I thought, well, do we have a good trunk line to the internet? If you wanted to put like a Google, Amazon, Microsoft type data center sized here and put a nuclear power plant, which they're talking about doing for other reasons, so you might as well power a data center or two. Well, can we connect? Apparently South Dakota can, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, we do have a history of fiber optic. I may have said this on the show before, but my dad was a land surveyor, and he did the land survey for the very first fiber optic communication network in the entire world. I
don't think you said that part about him on the show before, so that's new.
Yeah. We were early into fiber optic here. That was, 30, 40 years ago. I'm not sure.
We were a leader. We were a leader, and then we weren't. And then we're just a stupid schmuck part of the world now.
And it was early fiber optics, so I think they had to replace it in just a few years because it wasn't carrying enough data.
Yeah.
We're not the leaders that we once were.
56K modem level fiber optics.
That's right. It's basically a light bright set. type of situation.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know how hard it is to build a trunk. I don't know anything about that, about building, internet lines. But
yeah, and the main problem is, of course, we just don't have the clean energy here right now, and anyone building a data center is going to want clean energy.
Absolutely. And, North Dakota, South Dakota, they have excess sometimes. In fact, I think South Dakota, their whole year had 110% wind. So I'm sure they did some other generation, but for what they used, they had 110% of what they used as... I went to the medical appointment myself this morning. It's on a schedule on, Brian.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had a vision problem in my eye, and they think there's a blood clot in there, and now I have to go to Yeah, the podcast is in doubt. I can't do it without my vision.
Yeah, well, it's just one eye, right?
Well, that's what they say, but, the question is, why is it clotting? I've been taking care of my blood pressure and everything else, and even doing preemptive things because of my family history, and yet I've got a blood clot in my eye. Where else might I get one? Might I have a heart attack during the show? I definitely have to keep calm now for the rest of the show.
Yeah, okay.
It could have been our bonus episode last week where I was airing grievances because of the Festivus tradition, and I might have got a little too hot under the collar for that. But
yikes.
Someone also asked us from our Patreon page what my ideal EV would be. And, it used to be the Model Y, but I think I talked about on the show that I'm changing my mind a little bit, and also getting influenced by my kid and his generation who are kind of rebelling against larger vehicles. On the other hand, I'm old and things are breaking down rapidly on an hourly basis. Show to show, I may have a new segment on the show called What Broke on James This Week, just to keep everyone up to date. But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, it's nice to have a little bit higher ride, like a crossover is really nice, or just the Nissan Leaf and the Bolt, the way they are designed, they are small, but they have a fairly decent lift off the ground. So it's actually kind of nice getting in and out of those cars.
Yeah, well, the batteries for electric cars tend to be in the floor. So even if it's not a particularly high car, you're always kind of sitting on top of the batteries. So a little bit easier to get in and out.
Okay.
Moving on, our first story here is from NPR.
A doctor got tired of hearing that her patients couldn't afford electricity to power basic but critical medical needs, such as running their breathing assistance machines, recharging their wheelchairs, or even keeping their refrigerators plugged in. So she worked with a colleague on a way to prescribe electricity.
The power comes from rows and rows of solar panels on the roof of a Boston Medical Center office building.
I think I'm good. Thank you, though.
I climb a ladder to the edge of that roof with Dr. Anna Goldman and Bob Biggio, the hospital's chief sustainability officer.
All right. Yeah. I get off the edge.
Get off the edge.
Yeah.
We move to a safe spot amid these 519 panels. The hospital uses half of the energy they generate. The rest goes to 80 low-income patients who have chronic and complex medical needs. They are getting a credit of about $50 a month on their utility bill. Goldman says hospital questionnaires show thousands of patients struggle to pay that bill.
Wow.
This was a real eye-opener. It was something I really hadn't thought of.
That's a little close to home, but okay.
Yeah.
A little too soon.
Sorry, a brain opener.
Okay.
But yeah, obviously, people with low income are going to have a hard time paying their medical bills. And we have all of this fancy technology now, but it can use a lot of power. So, and here in North America, we tend to have pretty low electricity prices, especially Canada. Canada, like in BC, I think has some of the lowest electricity prices in the world. But of course, this varies, depending on where you live. And yeah, people are often having to choose with their medical care. And one thing I thought was interesting is that what they've done up till now is write a bunch of letters. So it says that the Boston Medical Center in the last year have written 1,674 letters to utility companies asking them to keep the patient's gas or electricity running. This was the only defense they had up until now, was to write a letter and hope that the utility doesn't cut the power. And so in the meantime, they've done this, and this was partly with money from the Inflation Reduction Act. They were able to get this grant, $1.6 million, to put up these solar panels. And they're hoping to do an expansion. They're hoping to spend another $11 million. And there's a wonderful picture here in the story. They've also got a garden up there on the roof. So part of the roof is solar panels, and part of the roof on one of these hospital buildings is a rooftop garden, and they're growing vegetables, and they're feeding those to their patients. You know, hospital food is notorious for being terrible.
Sure. Bland,
but
salt-free, and so on.
But it was always a bit of a weird juxtaposition because you go to the hospital to get healthy and then they might serve you some horrible food. So, you know, if they can throw some fresh vegetables in there, that's definitely a plus. But I just thought that was really interesting.
Well, this is my kind of hospital.
Yeah.
Garden and solar panels on the roof. Your brother did some beekeeping on the roof of a famous Canadian hotel for a while, right?
Yeah. My brother was part of a beekeepers cooperative, and they ran the hives on top of the Royal York Hotel in Toronto. And they used the honey from that to make, you know, honey for the restaurants and the food in the hotel.
Wow. This is quite astonishing. You know, it's basically the doctors are having to come out and say, my patient needs electricity to live, to be healthy. And I guess other people don't. I mean, like I have a breathing machine now, so I'd be hooped without, like I literally would be, you know, my quality of life would as bad as it is now. And it's not great. Would go down the toilet very quickly if I didn't have that. And, you know, I think I would rig something with a solar panel. I also think about this for the apocalypse, which is coming since, you know, Canada's apparently going to be America's 51st state, probably mistreated, and there'll probably be a civil war, zombies in there somewhere. I don't know. But, you know, if I think that I would have an inverter on my solar panel, my RV solar panel, and charge up and a couple of golf cart batteries, like a couple of pair of 6-volt golf cart batteries and power my needs here. But and my
we should talk about apocalypse prep maybe on a bonus episode.
I'm not serious, but you know, it has crossed my mind. So I don't know. It's you know, when you're poor, your health outcomes are worse, and having your electricity cut for some people would be devastating. So the fact that just the fact that their costs are reduced by $50 if you're in the poverty line below it, that's going to improve your outcomes too. Because then maybe you can afford medications, maybe you can afford, you know, just healthier food a little bit.
Yeah, and there's laws in place where I think most places here in North America where you can't cut the power off in the winter or cut the gas off in the winter because people would freeze to death. But there's no law, apparently, that can, you know, they could just shut your power off even if you need life-saving medical equipment.
Yeah, I never understood that. They used to cut it off here. I remember that happened to me as a youngster.
In the winter?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I live in an apartment building, so it didn't make much of a difference. But
right.
All right, let's move on to my first story. And it is something that makes me happy because I, unlike you, Brian, don't own any Teslas.
The universal plug and charge protocol for EV charging is coming as early as 2025. As this article promises, no more key fobs, no more app signups, no more complicated ports or adapters, just simple plug and start charging for everybody, everywhere.
Now, this has been a fantasy of mine even before I had my first EV, because I was doing a lot of reading, a lot of video watching, and I knew what the situation was like. This is from The Verge, by the way, and the link should be in your show notes. This is a great idea.
Yeah. So there's an international standards body that is getting together to sort this out.
Why they haven't done this years ago, I don't know.
Well, of course, Tesla was able to do it because they were owning and controlling everything. They were early to the game. They needed
nobody
to
else
build
was doing a whole lot outside of China, so they did what they wanted to do.
There was no charging network, so Tesla started from scratch. But if you own the cars, you own the chargers, it was never a huge issue. But now, outside of Tesla, you have many, many different manufacturers of cars and many manufacturers of charging stations. So it's a more difficult problem.
So I've got this Flow network of chargers in Canada. It's American too, but it originates in Canada, and it's more common around where we live and in the areas, you know, where we travel to from Western Canada. So I love it. It's my favorite and preferred charging network. The uptime is really good. And they have now, with my Chevy Bolt EV, plug and charge capability already. And when I got that, I loved it. And I thought, this is just like a Tesla. So one of the problems I had, and I think this was greater, you know, I was under a lot of pressure to get my charging underway as quick as possible on trips because I had kids I was dragging around who were impatient. And part of the problem was figuring out cards and different things and getting the machine to accept your app or your card or your whatever and re-signing in. With Flow, all I do is plug in and I can start walking to the restaurant or the bathroom or the whatever I'm going to do, get a snack or a drink, and that takes place instantly. I mean, it takes 30, 40 seconds to initiate, which is kind of long. It's longer than Tesla, which is about half that, I think. But I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to worry about my card. I don't have to worry about my app. I just plug it in. And now we'll be able to do that everywhere. And hopefully Teslas, too, will participate in this, and Teslas will be able to. I mean, have you ever plugged in, charged at a non-Tesla station with an adapter?
Yeah, I did it it was like, I think at the IKEA in Winnipeg. It was one of I forget the name of the charging network, but I had to create an app and everything. EVgo was probably it, yeah. So yeah, I did it, I think, once.
But that's level 2. That's like...
Yeah, that's a level 2, but the same idea.
You still haven't manhandled the CCS fast charging cable, which I want you to lift one day, because it's incredibly... You won't believe it. Like, it's just ridiculous. It's so hard to even twist it into the right position. So yeah, they're replacing that with a much more smaller and elegant Tesla adapter called NACS. But yeah, this is what is going to help charging. This is probably going to revolutionize how we even think about vehicle charging. No more fumbling through apps, no extra accounts to set up. And you can have all kinds of accounts. Like I've got a folder on my phone, and I don't even travel that far, but I've got probably 8 different apps for charging. No more. That's going to go away. There's just, like I've said before in the show, it should be like Interact, like a common payment system that you can use anywhere. Then maybe it's going to add a few cents to the thing to get between the different systems, but who cares? So you just plug in your EV and go, and that's the promise of this new universal plug and charge protocol. And it's set to roll out next year. And you know what, Brian? Next year is coming very quickly. Why? It's weeks away.
Weeks away.
I'm not sure that it'll be at the beginning of the year, but we'll see. The initiative is backed by a collaboration between automakers, which finally are cooperating on things, and charging networks, which are finally cooperating on things, and the U.S. government's Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, which will soon be turned into a garbage collection service or something, I'm sure soon, after the 20th of January. At its core, this thing is a secure framework developed by SAE, Industry Technology Consortia. You might see that written on your Christmas lights if you're putting up Christmas lights or different things like that as a standard. It leverages cloud-based systems to authenticate and process payments seamlessly. You plug in and the charger handles the rest. It's as simple as that. Now, while Tesla pioneered a version of this with its superchargers, this effort aims to make it universal for all EVs. This will bridge the gap across manufacturers and charging networks in North America. This is going to have to be redone in other areas of the world, Australia, Europe, China, wherever. It's going to have, its own remake over there. But as North America, where it's kind of hard to adopt right now, this will help, Brian, I think, a lot. It's going to have features like a certified trust list and ensure secure automated connections while enabling roaming between networks, plus future benefits like vehicle-to-grid energy transfer. This is another big aspect of this. Could make this a game changer for our power grids because, say you go to the restaurant with a full EV and the restaurant is 5 minutes away, maybe you could power the grid and sell electricity to offset part of your meal, and that would be great. And I think this can't come soon enough. I'm really happy about it.
Yeah, and the restaurant, won't have a blackout if you got your
you
EV
can power your own meals.
Yeah. Instead of having to, do the dishes if you can't pay the bill.
Which is probably my situation, is getting close to that, yes.
First of all, I want to mention ChargePoint. That was the one at IKEA. I did use the ChargePoint network one time.
Okay.
And
it's on my phone too.
Yeah. Quick shout out to my friend Ian. He bought a 2017 Chevy Bolt. So he's joining you in the Chevy Bolt Club.
Ian bought a Bolt.
Ian. Yeah.
Sorry, what year?
2017.
2017. Where does Ian live, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, around here, but I think he bought it on the West Coast.
Oh. Did he drive it home or did he ship it? I need every detail. Why didn't you ask details? Ian, get on the blower and send us some information by fax. Do you have a fax machine, Brian?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Used to, though. Okay.
Okay. Did you open the mailbag?
Let's open it again. I mean, it was a false opening, so there you go.
Okay. This is via Blue Sky, and it relates to, we were talking about parades and how it's terrible to have a parade full of children and awful diesel vehicles. So this is via Blue Sky. Thanks for the shout out. It was great to silently drive in the parade and only hear our music. No fumes blowing on the kids was a huge benefit as well, considering all the generators on other floats. We powered everything from the truck's onboard inverters, and it looks like a Ford.
So not only was there all these diesel trucks towing floats, they had generators chugging along,
generators as well,
which have no emissions controls at all.
No.
So parades, I'm starting to think, are a hazard for health, that you should keep your children away from parades until we electrify everything like Ryan did here in Ottawa, Canada. And he's got a picture of his truck with a inflatable, is that a Santa? Or, you have to forgive my eyes. I'm starting to use my excuse now.
I guess it's a Santa Moose.
Santa Moose, a Moose Santa. Okay, how Canadian. And lights and everything, and that is coming just from the outlets on the truck, because there are not only outlets, like normal power outlets, but there's like a powerful outlet where you could actually charge another EV if you wanted to at 240 volts. So that's interesting. We've talked a lot about parades this year. It's the year of the parade. I'm happy to see that, and happy to see so many. And you said last week that you were at the Santa Claus Parade by chance in Toronto, out your window, and saw a lot of EVs there.
Yes, some EVs, some diesel, so it was a mixture. But yeah, it's one of those things that's changing, and hopefully quickly.
And I got another one here from Eric in the Bay Area. Hi, Eric. Says, hi, James and Brian. Thank you for another great show this week. Well, we could stop there and it would already be a good letter. But I'll continue. During the episode, you both were discussing the advantages of James's passive solar house, and James mentioned that cities should adopt building codes, etc., that encourage passive solar buildings. Let me interject. I think that we talk about energy efficiency. When you hear about climate, people who work for governments who develop policy, they're always talking about how energy efficiency is a big part of the puzzle, and that is particularly true in a country like we live in Canada, because it's cold.
Yeah.
And it's also true for places that are hot as well.
And if you just orient the houses so that they have a nice southern-facing exposure with lots of windows.
It's a simple thing to do.
It's so simple and does so much, and then also a roof line that faces south that can help with possible solar in the future.
Yes, and then just also the overhangs are important as well. You have to, based on where you are on the planet, you have a different sort of overhang formula, and so that in the winter, the sun goes below the overhang and shines right through your window and heats the house, but in the summer, that overhang blocks it when it's higher in the sky. And that works. It's simple. It's not complicated. It's not even expensive. It's not an added expense. It's just build the houses facing the sun and have overhangs that are appropriate. It's a simple building code that can take out a chunk of emissions in colder climates and even, temperate climates. So the letter continues, when I heard that, I remembered that the city of Davis, California had adopted just such a building code way back in the 1970s. I attached a PDF regarding Davis's sustainability practices, and it mentions the passive solar building code in the section on land use. The document also mentions the 3rd Street improvement project near the university that I had the privilege of working on as a civil engineer at my last job. I've also attached a screenshot of the text describing the code because the document didn't allow me to copy and paste it. Keep up the fantastic work on the podcast, Eric from the Bay Area in California. And let's see here. It's fine print. Since the mid-1970s, the city has required new residential projects to be oriented north-south to take advantage of cooling breezes in the evening. So,
it's a different problem.
Where we live, we have northwest winds and southeast winds, basically, most of the time, one or the other. So, I don't know, because you live near the coast, maybe the wind either comes from the coast or blows out to the coast, so that that is how you orientate the house to cool it in the evenings, which is also, a different factor. I've looked at this, some other research from sort of the Home Inspector Association of the United States. And it says that many older home designs were oriented through the use of a heliodon, which is a movable light source used to mimic the sun's path that hovered over a small-scale model of a proposed building. Today, though, mathematical computer models calculate location-specific solar gain and seasonal thermal performance with precision. So I'm hoping that your architect, Brian, will take this into account, and you can oversee this when you build a sort of a year-round home at the lake, and have the added ability to rotate and animate a 3D color graphic model of proposed building designs in relation to the sun. So everything's done by computers now, of course. Homeowners may now tap into a specialty market of homes designed to spin on their axis in order to follow the sun. Yeah.
Okay.
This is weird. Apparently there's places where there's UFO-shaped homes which can spin on a full You like spinning restaurants, rotating restaurants? Well, maybe you should get a rotating cottage. Maybe you should just rotate to follow the sun.
That's a great idea.
It's not a great idea, is it? Because you want to look at the lake.
I don't know. I don't see any problems.
You don't want to look at your neighbor's house. I can't believe that. While some passive solar features are relatively recent innovations, the practice of orienting a sun to the path of the sun is as old, Brian, as civilization itself. Examples are numerous, from the south-facing doors on Neolithic and ancient Ming Dynasty houses to the astonishing
Pueblo
ruins in southwestern Colorado, which I have not seen and I wish I had. So thank you for the letter, Eric, and we will appreciate anyone contacting us with anything at all you have to say. Questions, comments, thoughts, information that you'd like to add. We love to hear from you. Please contact us by email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Leave us that voicemail you've been wanting to leave us at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. We love those. And join the conversation on our Patreon page for free. That's where we're posting things. Whether I'm alive or dead will be posted there on a regular basis. So you know whether to tune in each week. And you can also get additional content for free and even more if you support the show. As always, you could donate to the show through PayPal, a one-time or continuing donation. The link is always there in your show notes if you'd like to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the Pope. The Pope has been on the show before because he has been an advocate for clean energy and getting off fossil fuels. So the new Pope Mobile is a Mercedes-Benz, and it's a reworked version of the G-Class SUV from Mercedes-Benz. And there's some nice pictures here. This story from Electrek. The Pope always likes to have a high seat in the back.
Sure.
Where he can, wave to the adoring crowds. And so, as far as I know, Mercedes doesn't actually sell electrified G-Wagons to the public. So this appears to be a special one-off.
Mobile around these days. Like I remember when I was a kid, you see the Pope on TV in his Pope Mobile going through crowds of thousands of onlookers. But nowadays, do they even do that? I don't remember him doing that recently.
Yeah, well, I don't keep up with all the Pope news.
I think one time, you don't? We need a Vatican correspondent. You've got so much Pope news, we're going to have to hire a Vatican correspondent.
But anyway, it goes on to say that the Vatican has announced that they are going to transition all of their vehicles. We have mentioned it before. They do have some electric vehicles. Apparently, the Vatican has their own fleet of cars.
Sure.
And they're going to go all EV by 2030. And Volkswagen is their partner to do this. So they're going to have 40 electric vehicles being delivered next year from Volkswagen.
Well, Vatican, I ask, what's taking so long? You've done so many bad things. Why aren't you making up for it by at least buying electric vehicles ASAP? Just tell your parishioners to add a couple bucks to the pot. You can handle it.
Yeah. And we have one more piece of audio here that is definitely not the real Pope.
Here at the Vatican, our vehicles will be all electric by 2030. After that, it will be considered a sin to drive a combustion vehicle. So be prepared to add that to your confession if you're still driving a fossil burner.
Yeah, my confessions are long enough. Thank God I drive electric vehicles. And now moving on to the Earth. It's dimming.
New research says something still doesn't add up. There was this gap, this zero point 0.2 or so degree of global warming that was unexplained. What we found was actually it is the albedo of the planet.
Yeah, the albedo of the planet, how much it reflects. We are having less cloud cover. You know, this is part of the reason why they thought 2023 was so warm and this year is so warm. There's a number of different things going on, but one of them is that there's reasons why there may be less cloud cover. And this story can be found on cbc.ca and many other news outlets and science websites. It's all over the place. 2023 was officially the hottest year on record, and as we look at the continuing trend in 2024, scientists are uncovering a surprising factor behind this unprecedented heat. It turns out Earth is getting darker, literally darker. A study published in Science highlights a decline in Earth's reflectivity or albedo. This means less sunlight is bouncing back into space and more is being absorbed, leading to a higher global temperature average. One of the culprits, a reduction in low-level cloud cover, particularly in the northern mid-latitudes and tropics, which traditionally play a critical role in reflecting solar radiation. The findings are concerning. Researchers have been puzzled by a gap in the warming data, an unexplained 0.2 degrees Celsius rise in global temperatures, and they think this might have something to do with it. Factors like El Niño, volcanic eruptions, and changes in shipping emissions. Yes, shipping emissions actually reflect sunlight, and they've changed what they're using in ships. We've mentioned it before in the show. It's a remarkable story. I think it might be on my list for the top stories of the year, by the way. I'm going to completely interject here. Our regular release podcast day is Christmas Day. So 80% of our listeners are in North America and they'll be occupied on that day. So we're going to have a best of the year show between Christmas and New Year sometime, and we're going to skip a week in there just to let you know in advance. But I'm putting together my list of stories, and that was on my list. So scientists are diving deeper into the role of clouds in climate change. Less cloud cover may stem from ocean warming, reduced trade winds, or other large-scale atmospheric shifts. A lot of time we talk about how glaciers and the ice sheets disappearing stop reflecting light, and that's a bad thing. This is another part of the equation that they are only starting to learn how to understand, and yes, it is concerning. What's worrying is the possibility of stronger feedback loops, warming oceans causing fewer clouds, which in turn leads to even more warming. The study suggests we might be looking at a new phenomenon here to stay, one that could signal even greater climate sensitivity than previously thought. It is a complex and evolving story that underscores the urgency of addressing climate change. And of course, we talk about that weekly on the show. It's an important thing. Write your politicians, stay active, vote appropriately, and stay tuned to the podcast.
Yeah, and we have talked before, every once in a while, somebody floats a plan of like creating more cloud cover. Like there are ways to artificially create more cloud cover. So that's one possible solution, but it's one of those things where it'd be hard to know for sure if it was actually going to work.
And last week, we talked about the United States having a system to actually find out if someone is doing that. Some billionaire or some state is doing things on their own because we don't know how things will turn out.
Yeah, and there's been attempts before. Cloud seeding is a thing where you try and, get the clouds to rain. So, it's not like a crazy thing that hasn't exactly been tried before. It is.
I think UAE or Saudi Arabia, UAE has been doing that. And just to give them some rain in their desert so that they can grow luscious plants in their cities. So it's a strange thing.
Okay, a couple of quick stories here. Hyundai is going to set up 600 fast charging stations in India. India, definitely an emerging market for EVs. They're trying to get the EV revolution going in India. So Hyundai is committed to 600 fast charging EV stations in the next several years. There's currently about 12,000 public EV charging stations in India, which isn't too bad, but it's a very large and populous country. And Hyundai is hoping to eventually get a piece of the pie of that market and eventually build EVs in India. So a charging network is sort of laying the groundwork for that. And quick story here about Lion Electric. we have mentioned them many times before, so I thought we should mention the bad news story of Lion Electric. Lion Electric is a Canadian company. They make electric school buses, and just like you don't want emissions in your parade choking all of your children, you do not want emissions from diesel buses for all the kids that have to ride school buses. We love electric school buses here at the Clean Energy Show. Many have been deployed. Many more need to be deployed. But Lion Electric was one of the larger companies, and they have a factory in Joliet, Illinois. And they just announced some big layoffs. They're laying off 400 of their 700 employees in Illinois, and they're looking for a bailout. They've fallen on hard times. The CEO has stepped down, and they're working on a last-ditch effort to try and keep the company afloat. So hopefully things go well.
They're relying on government incentives, and with the change of administration in the United States and the change coming in Canada, no doubt there's going to be less money for them. And it's not a priority number one. City busing seems to be a higher priority in Canada, but there's also been a lot of grants. I don't know, maybe they're not competing. Maybe they're not making buses as cheaply, but if I had kids, I would want them to be riding on an electric bus for health reasons and for developmental reasons. So that's too bad to hear, because they're a good company and they're making some decent products, but maybe some people are just having a hard time competing with China, and incentives are also important in some sectors.
These are tough businesses. Vehicle companies of all kinds are going to be struggling.
All right, coming up next, it is the lightning round. We'll be right back. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest news in clean energy and transportation from the past week.
If you feed a small amount of seaweed to grazing cattle, it produced 40% less methane, study has found.
What? That's crazy.
I know, but it's not surprising. Why? Because we've had a listener who wrote us just a few weeks ago from the Pacific Northwest, who was the chief scientist for a company that makes seaweed for this trial sort of situation. And 40% less methane. And he said that's why they're doing it. So why not? If you're eating beef and it's causing a lot of greenhouse gas pollution, which methane is, 40% is a big chunk of all the beef that's in the world right now, Brian.
Yeah, that's an impressive statistic. That's great.
And hopefully seaweed is tasty. I want my cow to be happy if I'm going to eat him. But this is from Euronews. Finland currently builds the world's largest air source heat pump with a capacity of 33 megawatts. Now, how much is that? Why, it's 4,000 times the size of yours at home, Brian, that you have.
Wow. That's
in terms
amazing.
of an average residential heat pump. It's interesting that they're building such large things to power, heat industry or large sections of buildings, neighborhoods.
Yep.
BYD sold 1 million plug-in vehicles in just the last 2 months. 1 million.
Wow.
From one company in China. It's a Chinese company. They sold them mostly in China, but also around the world, including Africa, Brazil, Middle East. In October, 24% of European auto sales had a plug. So we're almost at 25% as far as having EVs or plug-in hybrids.
Yeah, so some of those would be plug-in hybrids, but 24% in Europe, that's very good. That's getting up there.
And it's time for a CS Fast Fact. Kenya is Africa's leading country when it comes to renewables. In 2000, fossil fuels contributed 60% to the electricity generation. And today, it's just 6%. So, wow. Kenya. Yeah, if Kenya can do it, so can you. In 2023, electricity rose from almost 50% geothermal now, and 20% wind and solar, and 22% hydro. From Yale Environment, get this. In Mexico, 75% of heat-related deaths are among people under the age of 35, a new study finds. We always associate heat-related deaths with the elderly who are stuck in their homes and maybe alone and not taken care of. But in Mexico, they're finding that the 75% of them are under 35. The analysis published in Science Advances found that from 1998 to 2019, heat killed around 3,300 people each year. Of these, 75% were under 35. Authors speculate that young adults may be more likely to face severe heat as many work outdoors in farming or construction or in factories that lack air conditioning. Small children and babies are also highly vulnerable to heat as their sweat glands are not yet fully developed. Researchers say the number of heat deaths among children and young adults may be even more stark in parts of Africa and Asia, where there are large shares of young people and outdoor workers, as more common in there than they are even in Mexico. BC, the province of British Columbia, Canada, on the west coast, announces 9 new wind projects to power the equivalent of 500,000 homes. Now, BC is hydro.
Yeah.
They've got hydro up the yang. That's all they're doing is hydro.
And some of the cheapest electricity in the world because of it, because they installed all that hydro a long time ago and they're reaping the benefit.
But they're also doing new hydro, controversially. But anyway, so it seems weird to see wind there because they haven't really had to get off their butts and do that. And when I was there, I didn't see any solar at all. I was there a couple summers ago, and I remember it's strange, like not seeing any solar in such a progressive place.
Well, when the electricity is so cheap, like 6 cents a kilowatt hour, there's just less incentive to build solar.
It would not pay off. The more expensive your electricity is, like California and Australia, the more advantageous it is to jump on the solar on your roof bandwagon. Majority of the projects are in the interior and north of British Columbia. That is away from most of the population, although there's a lot of in the interior, I suppose. It will add about 8% to the power supply, the government says. So this November, compared to last November, 1 year ago, saw BYD new energy vehicle sales rise by 50%. We are always talking about how EV sales are slumping. They're not 30% anymore. They're only 18% or 14%. Well, here's an example of something that's really working. Why? Because they own the supply chain up and down. Even the ships that take the cars, they own it.
Yeah, there's been no real slowdown in battery, electric, and plug-in hybrid sales. It's just the rate of growth slowed a bit, and then all the headlines were EVs are dying or whatever. But this is definitely not the case.
This is very significant. Brazil, as you probably know, is a big customer, even if in the United States isn't. Brazil is about 2/3 of the U.S. population, and they don't have their own auto industry, so they let in the Chinese auto industry just fine, and they're buying cheap EVs. Hyundai, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, their sales numbers for that electric vehicle have soared 110% in the United States November over November. You know, we've always liked Hyundai EVs, but they also, when they came out initially a few years ago, they didn't seem to want to sell too many of them. But now they're ready to sell them, and sales are hugely up year-over-year.
Actually, making enough of them is key to having these kinds of sales. And the Ioniq 5 is a great car. People love it, and it's doing well.
Yeah, and that might be on my list of perfect vehicles for me. It's not terribly big, but it's, does the job, and it charges fast. From Egypt Today. How often do we talk about Egypt Today? Not very often. Egypt is planning to add 18.6 gigawatts of wind and solar to its grid by 2030. So Egypt, making some moves. The average price of lithium-ion battery packs has fallen the most it has in 7 years, according to a Bloomberg NEF survey, and a development likely to accelerate price parity between electric vehicles and gasoline-powered cars. Bitcoin miners have purchased a 112 megawatt North Texas wind farm. So they bought their own wind farm that already existed, and now that wind farm is not selling to the grid. It is just behind a virtual fence, and now it just is for Bitcoin mining. And now the Bitcoin miner bros will tell you that Bitcoin is good for the environment because we will just sell more solar and wind. It'll develop it. It'll bring down the prices. I'm not seeing that yet. I'm seeing stuff like this, which is, and then, data centers for AI and everything else are doing the same thing. They're buying their own nuclear reactors that are going dormant and revitalizing them, but not for the grid, for their own use. But I guess if it's clean and you're adding, the wind farm is a good idea, but it's also an economics thing for them. They're not necessarily concerned about their environmental impact. Oh, it's time for the tweet of the week. Yeah, I'm still on Twitter, sort of, from time to time. Also on Blue Sky. Check us out on Blue Sky. If you're not there, go. This is from the... I had to repeat this because it was so weird. This is from the Texas governor tweeting, and he's a presumed redneck, Greg Abbott, right? Well, he's finally come around. He says, Texas energy powers our homes, our businesses, and our future. Texas is leading the way with our all-of-the-above energy strategy with more solar and wind jobs than any other state. Finally, taking some pride in that and admitting that. Texas is also number one for wind energy and number one for solar energy. And he, Brian Stockton, is correct. Finally admitting that. And finally this week, from The Guardian, the International Court of Justice begins a historic 2-week hearing it started on December 2nd, so it's in the middle of it now, on obligations that countries have to cut emissions and what happens if they don't. The fact that they're hearing this is important. A handful of countries should be held legally responsible for the ongoing impacts of climate change. Representatives of vulnerable states have told judges at the International Court of Justice. During a hearing at the Peace Palace in The Hague, which began on Monday, Ralph Regenavonu, let's call him that, his special envoy for climate change and the environment, said responsibility for the climate crisis lay squarely with a handful of readily identifiable states that had produced the vast majority of greenhouse gases, but stood to lose the least from the impacts. The court heard how Pacific Island states such as
Vanuatu
were bearing the brunt of rising sea levels and increasing frequent and severe disasters were happening. We find ourselves, quote, on the front lines of a crisis we did not create. The hearing is the culmination of years of campaigning by a group of Pacific Island nation law students and diplomacy spearheaded by this, say it again,
Vanuatu.
In March last year, the UN General Assembly unanimously approved a resolution calling on the ICJ, the International Criminal Court, to provide an advisory opinion on what obligations states have to tackle climate change and what the legal consequences could be if they fail to do so. So over 2 weeks or so, the court will hear statements from 98 countries, including the rich ones. The U.S. and China, for example, the world's largest emitters, will make statements too, even though neither fully recognize the court's authority. Brian, it doesn't matter. The ICJ says its advisory opinions are not binding, yes, but experts who are following this are quite excited about it, which is why I'm putting it here. Experts stress that they clarify rather than create new law. So they're clarifying the law. They're not creating new law. And this will be referred to as authoritative documents in future climate litigation during international climate negotiations. So this could start a landslide of climate lawsuits. And we know what that did to tobacco. We know how this is an important aspect that is just burgeoning in the climate struggle. Lawsuits, we love lawsuits.
It's some type of framework going forward when there wasn't framework before. So that is a great step forward. And that's our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, we're Clean Energy Pod. And join our Patreon community for free and get special posts not found elsewhere. That link is in your show notes. You can also support the show with a purchase from the merch store. And rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And remember to follow us to get those new episodes delivered to you every week.
And special thanks to our Patreon members, Apple Podcast subscribers, and YouTube membership holders for supporting the Clean Energy Show. Join our Patreon today as a paying member and get access to exclusive bonus episodes, which we just did. And we do one every month, and they're fun. And I don't know what else to say about them, but I'm starting to really enjoy them, and I hope the listeners do as well, because we need to give you a perk for supporting the show. At certain levels, you get that perk and other perks as well. You also get ad-free episodes, exclusive access to the Clean Energy Show Discord server, discounts at our merch store, early access to episodes before the public gets them, and behind-the-scenes material and private updates, thank you credits on our video podcast, and shoutouts on our audio podcast. We'll see you again in 7 days.
See you next week.